Thank you everybody for coming. Let's start our day with introduction. I'm going to start with myself, Muhammad Ali from MB Transportation. We're going to go this way and then come in this way.
Colin Toma, Citizen Change Advocate with Disability Services and Legal Center.
Yeah. I'm John Helser with the Roundtable Center.
I'm Yuri Kazan with the City of Santa Rosa Paratransit Transportation Planner, and it's great to see we got a new chair, Mohammed.
Yeah, Mohammed's our vice chair.
Vice chair, okay.
But filling in today.
Who's our chair?
Stephen Schmitz.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
I'm Dana Trey with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority.
John Gaffney, ADA Compliance and Program Manager for the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District.
Maria Arce with Petaluma Transit, Marketing and Outreach, and Paratransit.
Catherine Stubbs with SCTA.
Chris Barney with SCTA.
Should be good to go.
I'm Christina Law, completely blind paratransit user of Santa Rosa Paratransit, Sonoma County Paratransit, Marin Access, and I used to be with Petaluma Paratransit. I grew up there, so shout out to old P-Town there. Missed a few.
Tracy Beards, I'm a member of the Area Agency on Aging Advisory Council.
And I'm Kathleen Cortez. I'm with the Area Agency on Aging.
Thank you. All right, let's open it for the second part with the public comments. If anybody has, you can start there.
Yeah. If you could let the people online introduce themselves as well.
Is anybody on the phone?
Adam Garcia with SCTA.
Oh, thank you.
Caitlin Igo with North Bay Regional Center.
Oh, nice.
And Tobias Weir with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities.
June Nursini with North Bay Regional Center.
James Cameron with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority.
One more. All right, thank you so much. All right, thank you everybody. Did we miss anybody? I missed it twice. All right, let's start with the public comments. If anybody has anything.
Sure, I'd like to speak on a recent, if I may. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to let everybody know that we recently had a big win for Californians with Disabilities. The California State Council on Developmental Disabilities, along with the coalition of disability advocate partners, including APSI, Disability Rights California, Integrated Resources Institute, PathPoint, and Progressive Employment Concepts, championed what began as a proposal to the legislature and ended up in the successful creation of the Employment First Office. California became an employment first state in 2013, yet employment of people with disabilities has continued to linger at 17%, despite their ability and desire to work for wages at or above the state minimum wage. The Employment First policy assumes everybody wants to work and that the needed services are provided regardless of the severity of individuals' disability. Used successfully in other states, the Employment First Office will help support and coordinate the consistent understanding and application of Employment First policy statewide. The Employment First Office will be a permanent state office under the California Health and Human Service Agency, charged with facilitating the consistent and complete interpretation and implementation of the Employment First policy across many state agencies.
I already tried.
I just wanted to let everybody know that this legislation is coming to fruition. It was championed and the office will be created by, I think it's going to be in January 1st, 2025 as an Employment First state. So they're going to be a permanent office. It's going to be through the Office of Human Services. And so exciting news for the state of California and for those with disabilities who really are seeking meaningful employment. So thank you, everyone. And I'm really proud of my colleagues who championed this legislation behind the scenes. And just to let you guys know, we'd love to have more community input at our regional advisory committees and a lot of our meetings. You can check us out on the website, www.scddw.ca.gov. And we have lots of, we do things on the state and federal level to try to get legislation passed for people, have more inclusion with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Cool.
Anybody else?
Yes, I'm just curious what practically what does the legislation mean? From a like, if the legislation was passed, what would change on the ground are you expecting?
Push the button.
Tobias, did you hear me?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
If the legislation passes, what would you expect to change on the ground?
It actually has passed.
Thank you.
And so it will be having a permanent office through the California Health and Human Services Agency. Is going to be charged with facilitating the consistent and complete interpretation and implementation of the employment first policy across the state. Agencies and departments providing services to intellectual and developmental disabilities community. And it was championed in 2021 by Senator Durazo, the original bill for the, which directs the phase out of sub-minimum wage programming in California effective January 1st, 2025. As an employment first state, the next logical step was creating an office to help realize the employment first policy and improve employment opportunities for our community statewide. So one of our chair of one of our committees, Wesley Witherspoon, says we all want to work, employers need employees, and the new employment first office will focus on helping everyone, including the state agencies supporting us. So it will resolve the incomplete interpretation and implementation of the employment first policy. And you could read more about it on the website. It's legislator.ca.california. Well, actually, just go on to our website and you'll see it under our news reel. So you'll find more information there, lots of different links. So I don't want to get into all that right now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for clarifying.
All right, so let's go to item number 3. We have only one action. That's the approval for the last meeting. If we can get a motion on that. Second. Any objections? Nobody can hear me. Any objections for the last meeting agenda? Nobody. All right. That would pass. Thank you so much. Now we're going to go to the 4th item. I think that's with Dana, the FDA.
Yeah, I'll just introduce this item. So I think those of you who are planning to apply to the FTA 5310 call for projects are aware that this is out, and we did discuss this at our last meeting, but I just wanted to include the fact sheet that came out since then for your information. This is a program administered by Caltrans, and it is specifically for enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities. This is sort of a legacy of this program. Used to be a review through this committee, but we still can discuss it here. We no longer review the applications here. However, SCTA would be happy to provide letters of support to anybody who is planning to apply. Applications are due August 30th, and I'll just open it up for discussion if anybody has any anything they want to add or talk about grant applications.
For anyone who wasn't here at the last meeting, what specifically is the possibility to apply for?
So generally, this program provides funding either for purchase of paratransit or ADA accessible vehicles or mobility programs that help meet the mobility needs of seniors or people living with disabilities. And if anybody who has been the lead on any of these programs wants to add to that, feel free to.
Yeah, I can just tell you that at the Area Agency on Aging, we've had Section 5310 funding on and off for many years, doing different projects. This year, we are planning to apply for mobility management, looking at using our 565 info line to be more of a point for mobility management for transportation in the county, specifically for people with disabilities and older adults. So that would just centralize one number to call. Currently, a lot of different agencies get calls and they try to help people. This way we could direct people just to the IMA line and they have more information. They're pretty knowledgeable about Medi-Cal, transportation, and other resources that transportation agencies might not know about. So that's one thing that we're hoping to do. And then the other is we're looking at putting in an application for operating assistance, which would provide voucher funding so that people in rural areas where they don't have accessible paratransit might be able to take a taxi, a Lyft, or an Uber, or some kind of alternative that they don't have access to in their part of the county. So those are the two things that we're working on. I know there's equipment also. Other agencies have applied for equipment to get buses, software, radios, all kinds of different things you can use the funding for. But the target population to serve with the grant funding is older adults and people with disabilities.
And the agency has as well as funding for the treatment funding. The programs with the organization. We get lots of calls about why the gaps that in paratransit and the system. So this will be a focus to give why exact paratransit is not concerned.
Yeah, I'll just add, City of Santa Rosa has applied for the.
No, not yet. It's still charged.
Okay, that better?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think both your agencies are applying for the expanded programs, and then a City of Santa Rosa has applied for the traditional, which is basically vehicles. And we received funding in the last two cycles, one for an Oakmont vehicle, and then the following year for 3 paratransit vehicles. And so then in this round, we'll apply for 4 more paratransit vehicles to replace 2014 vehicles that are beyond their useful life. Yeah, so it's good. It'd be good to know if anybody else is planning to apply for, or if you guys have heard of anybody else applying for the traditional program or or the expanded program. Right.
I often do and did apply last round. I haven't heard from them.
Item number 5.
It's be Catherine.
Me. Okay. Sure, this is on. You have the presentation.
while Ross is doing that, wanted to remind everyone who I am, Catherine with SCTA, Transportation Planner and Coordinator. And this is a presentation due to a request that was made at a recent, thank you, TPCC meeting for examples of TNC partnership. So I'm going to give a quick presentation about that. Okay, perfect. And then could you like minimize the screens on the right-hand side? Perfect. Okay. This is not new. There we go, right there. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of the presentation. I'm going to give a quick reminder about what TNC partnerships are, go over the examples, the models they are, and then do a closing and then hold space for questions and discussion about what we saw. Just as a disclaimer, this is just to showcase the examples of TNC partnerships and not to provide detailed answers about the logistics of how these TNC models are actually implemented. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know many of us are familiar with industry jargon about TNCs and about the acronyms, but I wanted to pause for a minute to make space for shared language so that we all know what we're talking about, because TNC will be used a lot. So I just want to make sure that we're all aware of what TNC stands for. So, oh, this is an older one. So TNC stands for Transport Network Companies. They're also known as ride-hailing companies, and they typically provide on-demand transportation services for passengers. That's different than taxis or other more traditional for-hire transportation services, because TNCs don't maintain their own vehicle fleets, nor do they operate typical dispatch centers. Instead, passengers usually request rides directly from private drivers who are under contract with a transport network company, and they usually do it through like a smartphone app. So the most common examples of that are Uber and Lyft as an example of what they are. And partnerships are with companies like Uber and Lyft with transit agencies. And those partnerships I will talk about in the next slide. So the types of TNC partnerships that there are first and last mile, in which TNCs support connections to and from public transit stations and or stops. The second one is a replacement for fixed route, in which TNCs replace transit service when demand is low. The third one is new demand response, in which TNCs provide new service in low density areas. So an example would be like a business park or like a business warehouse. And the fourth one, the focus of this presentation, will be on ADA paratransit service, in which TNCs are used to supplement ADA paratransit service in a variety of themes. Next slide. So the three prominent types of ADA TNC partnership models are these three right here. Example number one being a transit agency enters into a partnership or contract with a TNC to provide service to their existing customers, but in a paratransit market. Example number two, the transit agency upgrades their existing paratransit providers to be more or to provide more flexibility, variety of transportation options, and have faster response times. And the third example would be for transit agencies to incentivize other locality regulated transportation providers, such as taxis, for example, to provide more ADA paratransit services on demand. Next slide. Next slide one more time. So the first example I'm going to provide is about the Greater Richmond Transportation Company, and this is in Richmond, Virginia. And so their paratransit provider is CARE, and their paratransit passengers use CARE, but the program that they established is called CARE on Demand. Next slide. So CARE on Demand matches available drivers with customers when they want to travel with little notice. CARE on Demand allows customers to have the option of same-day direct nonstop trips when they request it. There are two providers with this program that they established. The first one was with UZURB. It doesn't stand for anything, it's just the name of the company, but that was with a pilot in August 2017. And then they entered into a formal partnership with Roundtrip in December 2017. Both providers provide direct, nonstop, door-to-door, curb-to-curb service and scheduling assistance through live call centers. The way in which they do this, or the way in which they provide their services, that their drivers are specifically trained on passenger sensitivity, defensive driving, and passenger assistance. UZURB in particular provides another layer of training for their drivers, and they have the option for customers to request their favorite driver. For a round trip, they specialize in having app-based booking, and their customers are able to be picked up within 15 to 30 minutes of booking. Both providers have wheelchair accessible vehicles upon request if a customer or a passenger wants one. And so the cost of it is broken down as customers or CARE on Demand customers pay a $6 copay for the trip. The transportation company covers an additional $15 up to $15 of the trip. Should for some reason the trip exceed this $21 amount, the remaining cost is then explained to the customer in advance of the trip happening, and then billed to the customer. So similar to like how on Uber or Lyft, like you see how much the trip is going to be, and so you know how much it'll cost you before you take it. And they reported that the average cost of their trips are around $26. And so the results of this as of September 2019 was that the Greater Richmond Transportation Company now completes about 11% of its CARE trips through On Demand, and they've shifted more than 2,000 CARE trips per month to On Demand through this pilot program, then full-on program that they've established. Next slide, please. So the second example I'm going to be talking about is with the Transit Authority of Marin and Whistle Stop. Whistle Stop is the former name of the current program, current paratransit service of Marin Access. All right, next slide. So this is not the current version of this. Could you
relaunch the I could stop share for a second and use the PowerPoint, use the PDF.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you.
One moment.
So that $26 average cost per ride in that first model, do you know how much that compares to in the other version of the Paratransit, how much each ride costs?
I don't. That was only what the Greater Richmond Transportation Company just shared.
We don't know if it's more cost effective, way more expensive. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick,
yeah. Marin Access actually no longer uses Whistle Stop. With Transit.
Yeah, this was former information, but just as an example of how it's used.
Yeah, but and they call themselves.
What is the name one more time? Vivlon. Okay, thank you.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. Should be one more forward. Okay, here. I think that was the same thing. Thank you. So rather than using a per ride or per service hour subsidy approach with a TNC to operate this service, TAM chose to work with an operator which they already knew. So this allowed them to have greater control and access into how they wanted to upgrade their paratransit service. And so in particular, it allowed them to, and this is TAM with Whistle Stop with their service. And so working with them allowed them to have greater control of the user experience of how passengers were able to access rides, find rides, and just like interact with the service in general, whether that be internally with fares and fare policy that TAM was able to establish, or whether that be with routing and operational policies in which they were able to decide where service was available and what, if any, limitations there were on trip distance. This is also super helpful because it allowed them greater service or greater access to reporting metrics and data. I'll come to this point in a later topic because this is a big one. Driver education was a big one. They were able to screen their drivers, provide driver training, and allowed to let their drivers know how to support riders coming in and out of the vehicle if they needed wheelchair accommodation for the vehicle. And then vehicle standards, as opposed to where with the TNC like Uber or Lyft, where you don't necessarily know the quality or the maintenance of a wheelchair accessible, or if the availability of one in general is possible. With this example, they were able to know that these vehicles were existing and able to maintain the standard of these vehicles as well. Next slide, please.
What is TAM?
Transportation Authority of Marin. You're welcome. Right, let's see. Okay, so example number 3, this one is with no TNC at all, but with another locality regulated transportation provider, so with taxis. And this one is going to be with SFMTA, which is San Francisco Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and their taxi incentive program. And so next slide, please. And so just the difference in how TNCs are and how San Francisco taxis in general are, there are big differences in regulation. So with TNCs like Uber or Lyft, they don't have a lot of regulatory framework with around them, nor do they have a lot of enforcement with them either. There can be any number of Uber lives in a given street at one time. So there could be a ton in one area and a total desert of them in another area with no pushing or pulling unless the driver wants to go into other areas. And then there's limited oversight to ensure or compel these TNCs to provide access to people with disabilities. So a driver could deny a ride to someone and not have to report why, not say why, or just not go there in general. So there's not a lot of regulation with that. In contrast with San Francisco taxis, they have a lot of regulation in how they're run, how many taxis are allowed to be on the street at a specific time, where they're allowed to go. So they're much more spread out. They're required to undergo sensitivity training with seniors and individuals with disabilities, and their drivers, and this is part of the incentive, are incentivized to have ADA ramps on their vehicles. Let me see. Drivers are also taught communication skills and how to process SF Paratransit taxi debit cards for payment. So they're able to be able to take different forms of payment, whether it's a paratransit ride or not. And you're not able to have that with many other non-TNC or non-paratransit fleet vehicles.
When I lived in the city, I used to have one of those debit cards. They were fabulous. I can't say enough good things about them.
Oh, yay.
Yes, everything you're saying was right on a decade ago.
Yay. Next slide, please. So this is the SFMTA ramp taxi incentive. So the incentive with it is that it's $10 per paratransit taxi wheelchair pickup. You can see right here what one pass in the one pass to the front of the line at the San Francisco International Airport per 2 paratransit taxi wheelchair pickups in outlying neighborhoods, which is really great for accessibility and get to like high density destinations and able to get around to those neighborhoods surrounding it. There's up to $300 per month for capital cost assistance. And this is if a driver wanted to convert their vehicle to a wheelchair accessible vehicle, they were able to get this subsidy to offset the cost of transitioning their vehicle into that. Similar thing of having maintenance of these now wheelchair accessible vehicles, of having $300 per month in maintenance and operating cost assistance. And then $100 for every paratransit taxi wheelchair pickup performed by color scheme each month. So, and it also incentivize taxi drivers to complete and do paratransit pickups for passengers. Yeah. Next slide, please. All right, coming around the bend. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I was talking about before, with data and with reasons some transit agencies consider Lyft and Uber as like TNC options as opposed to in-house paratransit options. If you were to do Uber or Lyft, they tend to have lower or the lowest cost option for transit authorities. They have much more possibility of being known to the public in general. Uber and Lyft are part of the public lexicon, and most people, when you say them, know what they are, or it's easy to give an example of what they are just on your phone to someone. And because they're already established TNC routes, they can be a more convenient way of implementing paratransit service to passengers. As opposed to, and the other advantages that are with in-house paratransit is that you're able to have greater ability to control everything that's going on, to make sure that it's up to your standards, to make sure that it is on par with the preferences and the needs of your passengers, to have access to reporting metrics and data, to know and style the driver training, screening and support and things like that. So there are benefits to both, but the ultimate thing comes down to cost or control, like which one would be prioritized or a main priority in a decision that a transit agency is making. Next slide, please. And so here are other considerations. So we talked about costs. What is the allocated budget for a TNC partnership that a transit agency is making, client needs and preferences? Are your clients more familiar with one provider or another? Do your clients prefer to work with one driver in particular, or does having multiple drivers work well for your passengers? Is a provider able to meet the specific needs of your passengers, and which option would allow you to do that? When it comes down to the transit agency, what is the current staff's capacity to develop a transportation program? So not a lot of times people are able to upgrade their existing programs or work in a third lane of locality regulated providers. What is the timeline for implementation, and how to factor that into what your options are? Data is a big one, just because with Uber and Lyft, there have been a lot of issues with these companies in particular with sharing their data. In June 2023, San Francisco's city attorney's office issued a subpoena demanding that Uber and Lyft hand over data for their business practices, in particular to providing data on their drivers' practices and answer questions around disability, access, public safety, and discrimination. So how much data do you want? At what frequency, at what scale would you want access to the data of these programs, and to know how your passengers are being treated as they experience and interact with these programs? So having access to data is a big point, and that is a big factor when it comes to choosing a TNC partnership for a transit agency. Next slide. So in summary, partnerships with companies like Uber and Lyft, they can provide transit authorities with easier access to implementation, lower costs, more convenience for different things. But it comes at the cost of transit agencies not having data or control over the program in general. On the other hand, transit agencies, if they were to do a program themselves or work with other locality regulated providers, it will be limited by economies of scale. So like how big can you do it and at what rate can you expand it out? And then this, however, if they do choose to do that, they're able to exercise greater control and flexibility around how they want that to happen for them. So next slide, please. These are the wonderful resources that I use to make this presentation. Thank you to research, and that is it. Next slide. Holding space for questions. Thank you, everyone.
We can open for questions or comments. That's good. That means everybody's satisfied. That's good. I like it. Go ahead, Judy. You kept it. Go ahead.
Oh, nice. I'm in action.
Waiting for the microphone.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I'm just curious, maybe the thought behind giving the presentation here today, and if there were more discussion around applicability or, of one in Sonoma County for either one of the two models, I guess, that you presented.
Yeah. I can't remember who requested just more information about TNC partnerships, but just to provide examples of existing models of like what is going on throughout the country, and if that is any interest to any paratransit service provider in the county. So just mainly for like information sharing and awareness about any examples that Sonoma County should take on. I would leave that to paratransit providers, and then just see like which one caught their eye and which one seems more applicable to them. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that kind of before we even try to go there, the big main issue that I think is kind of getting in the way of that is that the hours of paratransit service are severely limited. So how can we even consider trying something like this, which I think is fabulous when the paratransit hours are understandably limited, and I know why they are, because the city of Santa Rosa, in my case, public transit is so limited in their hours of operation too. So it kind of seems as if we're jumping from A to L over here, and we've got a lot in between. I'm not getting that.
It could be a possibility that possibly like example one of going with like traditional TNC, so like Uber and Lyft could provide greater time spans for people to call rides and a request for rides that go beyond the hours of standard paratransit within the county. Or example number three, if we were in an area that had like sufficient taxi servicing to call or hail taxis that go beyond the hours of current paratransit providers. But thinking about the capacities that current paratransit has within the county and seeing what other options are available that can exceed that or meet the needs of passengers as well.
I was just going to say,
oh, it's blinking.
That, the problem with TNCs in Sonoma County is that there's just not availability of them in our rural areas where the need
is greatest. So that's problematic. And of the TNCs that are available, I don't know any of them that are ADA accessible.
Yeah.
I know that on the Uber app, you can select a wave vehicle, but being able to get one in Sonoma County is almost non-existent. Yeah. So that I see as problematic.
Yeah.
It's not just a problem with Sonoma County. Marin has the same issues. Taxi companies don't have accessible cabs either in these areas. Marin is just now leasing one of their Connect vehicles to a taxi company in Marin. We'll see how that works out. Someone asked a question about the cost of the CARE program from the first one. That was one of the case studies that was done on one of the panels I worked on for TCRP. If anyone's interested in that, the provision of alternative services by transit agencies, it's a 230-page document that goes over a lot of the regulations and everything else involved with using these things. But accessibility is a huge issue, especially trying to use it for an ADA paratransit thing because of the regulations involved.
Yeah, one of my friends who's visually impaired and also has cerebral palsy, who used to live in Pleasant Hill and now is in Fairfield in both those counties. She almost can't get an accessible Lyft or Uber. So it's not just a Sonoma County thing. I do get it. It's a big thing, but it's a thing all the way across the board.
Maria from Petaluma Transit. I was just going to add in, Petaluma Transit is looking right now at TNC and Microtransit, some kind of option, but we're running into the same issues. I formerly worked for Eastern Contra Costa Transit Authority, and we did have a fairly robust partnership. We did a combination of TNC and taxi, but we had to work like SFMTA very closely with the taxi agency, making sure that they were trained, making sure that they had access to vehicles. So it was definitely a hand-holding to ensure that we had a third option for our paratransit passengers. But I will say it was great, really successful, mainly because folks don't want to wait 3 days. They don't want to pre-book their trips. And it was wonderful to have an opportunity when they'd call in and they'd have that urgency to be able to say, here's another option. From a marketing perspective, it can be tricky though, because you're dealing with an unknown. When it comes to TNCs, you can't determine what the cost is going to be. If our paratransit passengers had issues with the app, who do we can't go into the app and fix it ourselves. Recently had a conversation, I can't remember if it's Uber or Lyft, but they said to me that their dashboard was better on the side of the transit operators so that we could go in, get a little more access. So I think it has improved, but yeah, just my Petaluma 2 cents.
I can add just a small piece of it because from experience, we've been doing it with Uber for the last 2 years, I guess, a year and a half of the pilot program. The big issue is like security. Cybersecurity for them is crazy. So the big deal. So for us to have our IT system to melt with their IT system, that's out of control. Yeah. And then the other things also, when Maria said also, when their website is down for any reason, for any, like a slide point, there's no way you can get in. You have to wait for them to fix it, then they notify us, then the client has to get in the system and then communicate. And for the client to understand that, it's hard. Because we dealing with the phone directly with the clients. They're not patient. And there is something wrong has to be fixed like now. Yes. And they don't understand how it goes back and forth. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Nobody heard me or not? All right, I'll say it again. All right, thank you. So that's part of the communication and the technology is the hardest part.
Mohammed, where were you providing that service?
That was the partner with the Marine Transit. They have a connection with Uber for the last year and something. It's a pilot program. So that end June 30th. And that's one of the things, daily problems that we have.
Yeah, part of why that ended was software licensing issues with Uber. So. One other thing just to mention, and it's kind of left field, but we are talking about using TNCs, and a lot of the TNCs were able to get pushed through without a lot of regulations from the PUC. We're actually, well, SF is actually taking on another level of that in that they have self-driving cars now, and they are to the point where they would like to be able to unleash these things on everyone. I have mixed feelings about it. And there are definitely some things that the companies are trying to get them to approve like dropping off in the middle of the street and things like that. If anyone's more interested in this, the next SFCPUC meeting on the 10th of August can be attended remotely. They're going to be tackling accessibility in that arena.
Thank you very much.
Kathleen, did you say you're applying for your 10 voucher and for taxi? You have some experience in giving out vouchers and that.
Yeah,
I think there's some overlap here.
The Caltrans voucher funding source is for alternatives to public transit. So it could be Wheelcare Express, it could be Uber, it could be Lyft, it could be taxi, it could be any transportation service that's not a public transit. So if you're in West County, you can take Bill's Taxi. If you're in Cloverdale, you can maybe get Wheelcare Express. So depending on what area of the county you are, you can call any service. But the way that I'm envisioning this to work, I mean, we use it at Adult and Aging where we have a lump sum. So our Adult Protective Services, our IHSS clients, they can get a ride to a doctor's appointment, but the social worker is the one that actually charges the ride to the credit card. So the social worker has, access to a credit card, the client's ride gets booked, and then the social worker just turns in at the end of the month their credit card slip, and then the grant reimburses it. The way we've worked with West County and other agencies is we have a contract with that agency. That agency purchases the rides, so the taxi rides or Wheelcare Express rides, and then they submit for reimbursement from AAA, and then we pay them. So it's a reimbursable contract, but it can potentially be used for anybody, even for mileage reimbursement. So people in Cloverdale where they might not have transportation service, if they have volunteers that are low income or want mileage reimbursement, the voucher program would pay for mileage reimbursement. It's just a matter of staff resources. Is it worth it to cut those checks and mail the checks, for a $7 ride? So it's got potential for a lot of things and to be a solution for those who need like a late night ride from the hospital or urgent care or something like that. But it's not a be all end all.
And it doesn't have any, it just replace it. People can take it anytime, anywhere. It doesn't necessarily extend the hours or increase services. It's just for individuals who or providers that basically subscribe a ride. There's no limitation to when you use it other than so necessary.
Yeah, I mean, we depending on if our project got funded, we would base it priorities like for medical appointments. So if somebody needed an urgent medical appointment and couldn't get there, it was late night, or we've heard like up on the coast, there's been issues where like maybe a spouse will drive somebody to the ER and then they're there for hours and hours and hours, and then they get released in the middle of the night. The 80-year-old wife doesn't want to drive all the way down the coast to Memorial to pick the person up, so they could take a taxi potentially from Santa Rosa to go back up the coast. So think situations like that are occurring with our older adults, and in many other situations. We've heard from younger disabled clients that want to go out for New Year's Eve, but they can't get a ride home from Paratransit at the wee hours of the morning. That is something we probably wouldn't fund, but there's a need for that service. So.
No, but I've done the Memorial thing. I'm not 80 and I don't live on the coast, but being a type 1 diabetic, I've had several moments where I get released from the ER at whatever stupid o'clock in the morning, as they call it, and Memorial has its issues, no doubt, but they have always been able to get me back home, and so that's definitely a necessity, I must confess.
Mm-hmm.
Talking too much here, but I'm just asking the question because I think we've all have some experience a little bit collectively with some of these programs, and we've kind of have done a number of studies on it, and I think we all kind of agree that there's a need for extended hours and improved access for senior disabilities. I just wonder if there's, you know, if there's a good project out there that can do that. So I don't know what it is, because I think the Petaluma one did it alone. You know, I mean, I can say Rosa's curious about, I don't know, funding would be, but I think generally curiosity.
Yeah, I think there's
continue to try to solve along with some of the other projects that have already been done.
I would say there's a great need for like a dial-a-ride program. I mean, we've reached out to Vivillon to see if they would do a pilot project in a limited geographic area. I've reached out to Becoming Independent that has ADA vehicles to see if they would want to do something. It's just cost, and we have a wide geography. If we could find a paratransit company or a contract company that would be willing to do that, there's funding available to develop a project. It's just narrowing the project to see, you know, how it would work here and who would want to do it. You know, putting together an RFP. I don't know if you'd get any applicants to take that on. But yes, we should work. It'd be a great work group for this committee to look at. You know.
So was there any interest from Vivillon or Becoming Independent?
Initially, Vivillon, years before the pandemic, was interested. They were moving to Sonoma County. They actually had an office in Cloverdale because they had a contract with Partnership Healthcare to do Medi-Cal transportation, but I think that fell through. And so that never transpired. So they weren't, you know, they didn't really develop services in Sonoma County. Becoming Independent, I met with them recently. Tracy and I actually met with them recently, and they're struggling, like many of you all, with drivers, shortages. They have a huge clientele. They service multiple counties. And so their drivers and vehicles are in use. A lot of times driving their clients to and from programs. So they didn't have any extra capacity to take on any community transportation. But they had in the past contracted with SMART to be a, what do you call it, emergency provider. If a SMART train incident happened and they had to get the passengers off the train to other places, then Becoming Independent was a backup provider to pick up those passengers. So there's potential out there. It's just the timing and the environment that we're in right now with driver shortages and insurance and gas, and the environmental obstacles are great for a small company to take that on.
So is it true that Marin Access no longer serves Sonoma County then? Yes.
No. Marin Access no longer uses Vivillon as our provider.
Oh.
Transdev is now operating our service, and they have since February of 22. Vivillon still does their own thing. Like you say, they have a couple of contracts with various providers. They're just not in the ADA paratransit and Marin business anymore.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I know Mohammed has a fleet after a certain hour. You know, I guess.
We do.
But I'm just saying, like, I think, you know, like some of the needs that were talked about earlier were, you know, the hours, you know, that it's clearly beyond ADA. So, but if there was funding out there, I would think, especially beyond the peak hours, there's probably more availability than there is during the peak hours.
And I'll just comment on the flip side of that. Yeah, there's lots of equipment out there, but no one to drive it. So
that's true.
We were running at about, unfortunately, and I hate to admit this out loud, but 75% on time, which is probably the worst I've ever seen it. We're back up to about 88%, but that's because we upped the starting wages to $23 an hour. It's tough. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, this is for Marin Access.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add that to the mix that I'm a former staff at Sonoma Development Center, and I remember during the fires we had huge issues with emergency transportation, getting people, especially with non-traditional wheelchairs and devices. It was a huge issue. We had to call in the National Guard to actually help us eventually because there was not enough vehicles that were specialized to be able to do this. So I have real concerns about the future. If not even ADA are willing to really, change their vehicles, and the ride shares, I'm sure, are not going to be, too enthusiastic with this. What is the future going to hold for those, especially with mobility needs in our counties, in this county especially? Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you. All right, let's find a solution in the next item anyway. So the microtransit, they'll solve all these problems. So let's see. It's still a new topic too, but we started at the last meeting, and let's continue this time and see what the transit agencies can say for that. And then if we have any comment, then we can add more for it. Who want to volunteer? Maria, you can start. Sorry.
This is my first meeting. I wasn't here last week, but I can definitely speak. So the question is about where we're at in terms of microtransit projects.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah,
that's great. So with Petaluma Transit, we're at the beginnings, definitely beginning stages. We just formed an ad hoc from our committee, from our transit advisory committee, to discuss what problem basically microtransit can solve in Petaluma. I am focused on paratransit, I'm not going to lie. So I'm looking at, there's options for commingling potential. So I've interviewed or met with quite a few microtransit offers and seeing what makes the most sense. So now we're going to the ad hoc to see, again, what problem. Is it going to be a geography issue? Is it, replacing low performing routes? I did launch a microtransit service in Eastern Contra Costa, but it was specifically first and last mile. So there was a real specific need getting to the BART station. So with Petaluma, although SMART will definitely be something we're going to look to service. The downtown area is one of the problems we're looking to solve. But looking at what else can we do, because these are all just kind of one-off problems. And if you just have one-off problems and not a group of 30 people waiting for you, it's not going to be successful. So finding the best way to use that service so that it can meet multiple needs. Initially, I think we're going to look at doing a one-year pilot, because I think with microtransit especially, it's a behavior change for people in terms of microtransit. I'm assuming this board knows what microtransit is. I don't have to go over that, but you don't. Okay. Do you want me to? Oh, okay. Why not?
We love shared language.
Yes. So I was like, did we already do the shared language on microtransit? Okay. So this is great because I'm doing this again next week. So microtransit is basically a technology offering. So it's, think about it like Uber and Lyft meets the bus. So you can use any vehicle you want. You can use a cutaway, a smaller, like a paratransit vehicle. I guess technically you could use a large fixed route vehicle. You can use a van, and it allows a passenger. Typically there'll be a zone set up. So for example, in Try My Ride, which was Eastern Contra Costa Transit Authority, we did like it was like maybe one zone was 1.5 miles, one zone was 2 miles. So initially we launched it, and you could only go to specific areas. This was to make sure that your wait time and ride time wasn't too long. So you could either go from your home, your origin or destination could be your home or wherever you're starting, but you had to be going to either the train BART station or a certain number of like designated spots. So we had shopping centers, hospitals. This ensured that those needs were getting met. That's how we began that particular program. But then once we got data, we realized that opening it up in terms of allowing people to go wherever they wanted within the service area actually didn't change the ride times or wait times too long. So what happens is a person will get their app, or they can actually call in some cases. They can select a ride, and it allows them to say, okay, it's coming in 15 minutes. Do I want to accept this ride? It'll give you an estimate for when you're going to get to your destination as well. I've known in rural areas, it's even worked even when the ride time or wait time is really long. So I remember when I began researching it, there could be like a 4-hour, your ride wouldn't get there for 4 hours. But in rural areas, hey, they knew the ride was coming. So if it's very different saying I'm waiting in my home for 2 hours for my ride to come versus I'm waiting at the bus stop and I'm not sure if I've missed the bus or if the bus is late or what the situation is. Microtransit also allows for a lot of flexibility. For example, on North McDowell, we're all dealing with a lot of construction, which is exciting. But it also means that if a bus is going to run into construction, it won't impact the route, right? Because no one's going to request a ride in a place that isn't accessible and they're not on a route, so they can go any which way they want as long as they get there. So it's a great, I mean, I love the service but you know, if it meets the needs. So right now we're in the beginning stages, but it is something we're looking to launch within the year. I know Smart is just launched their service, but theirs specifically is for the airport to the Smart shuttle. So yeah.
Petaluma has an east side of town, west side of town. It would possibly make sense if you to start out small, if it was, you know, if you're downtown and you're going anywhere west, you are one zone, and if you're downtown and you're going anywhere east, it's another zone. That might possibly maybe be one way of starting small and then expanding.
Yes, and I selfishly would love everyone's ideas on this because I'm in the beginning stages of this. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yes, I appreciate the help for sure. No, really. So that's where we are on microtransit right now. I'm happy to elaborate.
John, you have anything?
Nothing on microtransit. As far as paratransit and everything else, our fixed route, we're still at about 40% of the pre-pandemic ridership. Same with the ferry. Bridge ridership is down. It's still about 85% of pre-pandemic. However, we've seen a major shift to weekend travel as opposed to weekday commuter. Paratransit for the local service is up to about 65% of pre-pandemic, whereas the regional service is still about 50%.
That's a lot of reduction.
Yeah.
That's good.
But on-time performance is up. So I'm excited.
Oh, that's cool. All right, Yuri.
So this is our agency report, or we're talking specifically like
You can mix them together because it's the same if you want to do it.
So I think for paratransit ridership, we're at about 70% of pre-pandemic.
That's true. I can confirm that.
On a fixed route, we're up over 8% from last year. We're still down. We're about 85% pre-pandemic. Our youth ride program has been doing phenomenally well. We had 40,000 youth ride in May, just the month of May alone. June back up to 25, but yeah, April and May were very high. Excited for the fact that youth are riding free for the summer on all North Bay operators, including Smart. Just some other updates. We council approved our ordering of three new paratransit vehicles. Those vehicles, I think, will have 6 wheelchair spaces on them, kind of the point about all fold down seats. Well, there's 6 spaces for wheelchairs, or there's 2 standard spaces in the back plus 8 seats, like that. So, and then we also ordered a new Oakmont vehicle. So the paratransit should be here in 8 months. The Oakmont should be here in 12 months. Let's see, council approved our zero emissions bus rollout plan, which has city buses reaching full fleet electrification by 2037. Within the plan, we don't plan to purchase paratransit vehicles that are electric until 2032. Although with each purchase, we'll evaluate the market. and see if there is something that could complete our trips. We're in our last year of our MV contract, so we're going to have to bid that at some point this year, and last year of our eligibility contract with CARE.
Thank you. All right, let's start with the agencies.
So we're kind of in a hiatus. Our committees are on vacation for the summer. So I'm mostly working on these 2 Caltrans grants. So if I haven't
Reached out to you for letters of support, I will. It's just a lot going on. But one thing I did want to mention in the 5310 application, if you're applying, that MTC reviews all the Bay Area applications, and their deadline to get your application to them is August 23rd. So even though Caltrans has a drop dead of 8/31, it has to be signed off by MTC prior to that to be approved by Caltrans. So that's pretty much all that I've been working on lately.
Thank you. Anybody else? Update?
I was just going to offer, Yuri reminded me I think we got a 40% increase in youth ridership is what I was told this morning from the Youth Ride Free program. So we're really excited about that as well.
That's good.
Yeah. And I had a question for Yuri about your paratransit vehicle purchase. Did you guys have pushback originally about them not being electric? And if so, how did you get over that? Because I thought that's what I recalled in the past, and we're running into the same.
Yeah, our funding was, we've held off for quite a while, especially on one vehicle, trying to figure out a vehicle that would work. Since it's 50/10 funding, it has to be the purchasing mechanism has to work. So CalAct TA contract does have one vehicle on it that is an electric cutaway that theoretically could get 120 miles on it. Maybe it's a little more than that even. But when we talked to them, they were like, it's not even the miles that's the issue, because you're operating for 8 hours a day. So it's if you're just to drive one, yeah, you got it, but to have it out there for you. So essentially, you have to get more vehicles, or you got to wait for a bigger battery that can catch the cycle. And so we were seeing that, and so we met with the manufacturer, which I'm blanking on who that is right now. Somebody else has it. But I can point you to that direction. But and yeah, so there are vehicles out there that are electric, but just their ability to do the duty cycle it's recognized in the industry that they're not there because of the axle weight. It's too much weight for the batteries that would require. And so we took it to council and said, hey, we're going to review every order with the goal of trying to get electric vehicles. But even the ICT recognizes that there's no obligation to buy cutaways until 2026. So we basically said, I think starting in 2029, ICT says 100% of your vehicles have to be first electric. So after 2029, the first time we're going to buy a cutaway before it runs out of useful life, it's like 2032. So that's what we put as our target. And they're generally a shorter useful life. So that you're within that, like 5 years, basically, we'll be going through all vehicles. I think the other thing in ICT too is I think Class A's vehicles are not of the weight in which they are under the ICT rule. They might be under this new advanced clean rule, but they're not. So there's some nuance there. If you decide to go for a lighter weight vehicle, that's also not required as quick as the ICT. But
thank you. It is. It is.
Our council really wants us to go.
All the public funds are complicated.
That's almost what council members just to kind of walk them through those, particularly the ones we knew that would have really strong questions. Really as much as we do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're going to be facing the same. So wanted your guidance. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. If anybody has anything, we can open it for the public comments. So we can, yep, go ahead.
It concerns me. You mentioned that this is the last year of the MV contract. So what is that going to mean for City of Santa Rosa Paratransit? Is that going to affect the way it runs for us, or is that just an inside thing you guys are going to somehow iron out that we may not even see the effects of?
Yes, that is the goal, that you do not see the effects of it. I was just making sure that I was being transparent. For those of you who kind of, like yourself, Christine, who are aware of those. Yeah, go back out. I hope you will not see any impact of the shows.
Okay. Well, yeah, we like transparency, so thank you. Especially being blind, we like transparency.
Thank you. All right, any other comments? I can see who had his hands up. Dominic? Let's see it come in. All right, if no comments, thank you for coming, and we are adjourned. Thank you.